Hello, this is Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church. We're having a ladies' Sunday school class. Today we are covering Genesis chapter 43. We did 42 last week. In chapter 42 we find Joseph has risen in power till he's the second most powerful man in the land of Egypt. He's been given all authority to handle Egypt's response to the famine, to the 7 years of plenty, then the 7 years of famine. We have finished the plenty, and we are in probably the second year of the famine. So things are getting tight. When we read about the dreams of Pharaoh, he said there would be 7 years of plenty. He did not say 7 years of plenty for the whole earth. We're thinking it was just for the Nile area, for Egypt. He did say when he said about the years of famine that they would be for the whole earth, or the known world there at that time. So the rest of the world didn't know about Pharaoh's dreams. They didn't know about the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. They knew they were in a famine. It wasn't unusual for them to have one every so many years, and it usually lasted anywhere from a year to shortly before a year and shortly after a year. But we're into the second year here, and things are not looking good. So we're seeing when 43 opens, we're seeing that the sons have brought back one trip to Egypt's worth of grain back. The famine is in force. It was rearing its ugly head. At this time, Simeon is in prison. He's in the jail, in the dungeon. And the 9 boys had made it home. They told their dad, Reuben told Dad, we can't go back unless we take Benjamin, because the man thinks we're a spy. And the only way we can prove to him that we've been telling the truth is to take our brother back, to prove that he exists and that we've been telling him the truth. Jacob wasn't hearing any of this. He wasn't having any of this. Benjamin was not going anywhere with his brothers. And Reuben offered his 2 sons as a surety that if he couldn't bring Benjamin back, that his dad could kill his 2 grandsons. What a flip. I mean, you know, like this granddad's going to kill his own grandchildren. And Reuben is just so over the top dramatic. And Jacob just said right off that, no, absolutely not. Well, chapter ended. So now we're in 43. Time has elapsed. How much time? I don't know. Enough time that those food supplies that they brought from Egypt are almost gone. They are looking at the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, and they know that it's not going to be very long at all till they're in big trouble. So in 43, verses 1 and 2, now the famine was severe in the land. Bad. It's not just bad. It's severe. This is sad. I mean, they're in agriculture land, and it's not there. Things are not growing. No water, no rain. We haven't had rain here for a couple of weeks now, and our grass is brittle. It's not growing very much. You can imagine if it had been over a year. Verse 2, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back and buy us a little food. Verse 3, but Judah spoke to them, saying, the man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. Don't even bother to come back. If you don't bring that younger brother you've been telling me about back with you, then I'll know you're spies. So don't even bother to come back. If you're not going to bring that boy, don't even bother to come back. He said, Dad, he was adamant. He was solemn. He was as serious as a heart attack. He won't even see us. He won't let us see him to even ask for what we need. So that's crazy. But Judah continues. He said, but if you send our brother with us, we'll go down, we'll buy you food. Dad, that's the only way it's going to happen. Verse 5, but if you will not send him, we won't go down. For the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. He said, Dad, we don't need to use what resources we've got for this trip if Benjamin's not going. We don't need to expend the energy. We don't need to use the resources. We don't need to encounter take on this much danger if you're not going to let Benjamin go. It'll be futile. Verse 7, or 6 rather, and Israel said, why did you deal so wrongly with me as to tell the man whether you still had another brother? And then all the brothers, they kind of look at one another and then they all begin to speak at one time. The man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our family, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? And we told him according to these words, could we possibly have known that he would say, bring your brother down? Daddy just seemed interested in our lives and interested in our family. And he was asking us questions. We were trying to convince him how honest we were. Do you really would have wanted us to lie to the man? We didn't know he was going to ask for Benjamin to come back. Genesis 43, 8 and 10. Then Judah said to his father, Israel, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. He's going back over it one more time, trying to convince Daddy to listen. But let's listen to Judah. This is a totally unexpected something that you would not for Judah to say. We already know Reuben said, trust me and you can kill my boys if I don't follow through. Or words to that effect. But listen what Judah's saying. I myself, Judah says, will be a surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. And then a little sarcasm. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned this second time. We've had enough time since we got back to make this journey twice. Dad, if you'd have just been reasonable. Let him go with me, and I will be his. You can be assured, I will stand in for him. I will take care of him. I will take responsibility. If anything goes wrong, you can put it in the history books. It's Judah's fault. You can blame me. You can curse me for the rest of my life if I don't bring him back safe. Trust me. Trust me. Israel knows he's going to have to give up. Necessity is going to make that. He can't face the fact that his family is going to starve. Listen to Lamentations, chapter 4, verse 9. Those killed by the sword are better off than those who die of famine. Racked with hunger, they waste away for lack of food from the field. It's a slow, horrible death. And Jacob knows that that's on their horizon if he doesn't act. And their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels and carry down a present for the man, a little balm, a little honey, some spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double the money in your hand and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take your brother along also and arise and go back to the man. He's given up. He sees the necessity. It's not what he wants, but we've got to make the best of it. So he does the same thing that he did when he was trying to meet with Esau. Remember, he plied Esau with all kinds of expensive gifts, a plethora of gifts and items to soften his brother's attitude about him. He wanted peace with his brother, and he thinks that the gifts went a long way in providing that peace. He wants to get in good with this ruler in Egypt, so he's going to send him some gifts and hope that that paves the way for a good outcome. He also tells him, he said, okay, now let's talk about money. You take double the money with you this time, and you also take back that money that was found in the tops of your sacks of your grain. That may have been an oversight. Something may have happened there, and you'll be glad to give that money back to the man. But you take double money. Now, there's a couple of reasons why he may have told them to take double money. First of all, a famine is going on, and this is sometime later than the first visit. Prices go up as things get scarce. Okay, the more scarce an item is, the more expensive it is. So prices may have went up. They may need more money for that. It is also, in this area, not uncommon during this time to have to pay a ransom to get somebody back. And he's thinking about Simeon, or maybe even bribing their way out of Egypt with some extra money. So he says, you take some extra money with you. Okay, he takes a deep breath and he says, and take Benjamin. And he continues. Jacob continues in verse 14. And may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, and that he may release your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved. A lot of things in this verse. Did you notice? Or do you know? All right. God Almighty. The name for God Almighty is El Shaddai. How many times have you gotten in trouble and you did everything in under the sun to correct the problem, and then when it didn't work, you prayed about it? You talked to the Lord about it? Jacob's doing all he can do. He's done everything he can do. The only thing left to do is to go to God, to hand it over to God. And he gave it over to the God of the covenant. The covenant is in danger. Remember Judah saying they was all going to starve to death if they didn't go down? The covenant, the seed of the woman. We've been watching that all the way from the garden. The seed of the woman, the trail, the seed of the woman. Where is it going to come from? The seed of the woman. Where is it going to come from? That will defeat Satan and sin. We know the seed of the woman is Jesus Christ, but we're watching that movement of God's word all the way through. Okay, that's who he's talking to, El Shaddai. And the word mercy. Did you know this is the first time in the Bible you see the word mercy? He's asking El Shaddai, the most powerful one, the almighty one, to watch over them, protect them, even if they don't deserve it, to give mercy. And he hopes that their other brother and Benjamin get to come home with him. I don't know why he didn't say Simeon's name. But when you match Simeon's character with what's going on, Simeon was a rascal. He was more than that. In his youth, I can't speak for what he is now as a grown adult, but as in his youth and his young adulthood, he was very violent. He would fly into a rage. He was shifty. He was not a good character, okay? He showed that he's changed quite a bit, because when they took him to put him in prison, there's no record of him fighting back, no record of him berating Joseph or his brothers. It seems like he's grown quite a bit. But Jacob knows the boy from his youth. And he's won't even call him by name here. So in verse 15, so the men took that present. Remember the myrrh, the honey, and the almonds, and the pistachios. Some of those food products, it would have been, most of these came from trees, and the trees hold a long time before the famine affects them greatly. I don't know if that's the reason why they were still able to have that produce there, but they did. They took the present, and they took Benjamin, and they took double money in their hand, and they arose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. Joseph was at work. He saw them coming from a distance. He recognized them, this little motley band of Hebrew men. They would have looked vastly different from any Egyptians. He he counted them, I'm sure, and he thought he saw Benjamin with them. And so he sent his servant, his steward, out to intercept them. In verse 16, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my home and slaughter an animal, make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon." And then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, "It is because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time that we're brought in, so that he may make a case against us and seize us and take us as slaves with our donkeys." Oh my goodness, they're scared to death. Why? Joseph, when he was in prison, we said the prison was more than likely located where? Potiphar's house. Most of these houses, or these castles, or these mansions, had dungeons underneath them. Think about England and Scotland and those castles that you read about or hear about. They had dungeons. These were made into prisons. It stands to reason that there was one under Joseph's house. Okay? Get my drift? They also know that probably is where Simeon was already in jail, if he was still alive. There was no guarantee that Simeon was even still alive. It had been quite a while since they'd seen him. So they were afraid. They were also, did you notice, the very fate that they consigned their brother to? They sold him as a slave. It's something here that they are fearful of, very dreadful about. They are almost hysterical because they themselves, although they would consign a brother to slavery, they didn't want to be slaves. And then we see everyday thought and concern when they said about their donkeys. They're going to take our donkeys. The donkeys were a sign of wealth in their area. It was also, how were they going to get the grain home if they didn't have the donkeys? There was absolutely no hope if they didn't have their donkeys. It was just something they couldn't turn loose of it all in their mind. There was too much happening at one time. In verse 19 through 22, when they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house, and they said, "Oh, sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to the encampment that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we brought it back in our hands, and we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We don't know who put the money in our sacks. Please don't accuse us of being thieves. We are not." They're thinking he already thinks we're spies. We don't want him to think that we're thieves as well. It was sad. It was sad. But the steward, in verse 23, but the steward said to them, "Peace be with you, don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. Then he brought Simeon out to them. So the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their donkey feed. Oh my goodness, things are turning out so much better than they thought they would. This servant, the steward of Joseph, says, this has got nothing to do with your last trip when you were here. I had your money in my hand. I know I had your money. Your God, the God of your fathers, has given you a treasure. They missed something here. They missed that this man is talking about their God, Jacob's God, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, their God, not little g God, the Almighty God. But that their anxiety and their fear, that just went over their heads. And he was so hospitable to them. He brought them in. It would have been much cooler inside those stone walls. It would have been shadowy. He brought them in fresh water to wash. They've been on a journey some weeks. Simeon, he would have been coming straight out of the dungeon to them. I bet you that was a wonderful reunion. I know Simeon probably thought several days in his interment, I'll never see my family again. There's no way that Dad will let Benjamin come. They won't come back because there's no use in it. They won't come back. Or if they come back, they'll be my neighbors in this cell. I don't believe I'll ever see them again. I'll die here. No word from home for all this length of time. And all of a sudden, the steward comes down and says, come with me. Takes him up. He's probably very apprehensive. Takes him up, and lo and behold, there stands all of his brothers. All 10 of them. What a reunion. Back clapping and hugs and shouts and looking into one another's eyes. Can you imagine what a wonderful reunion it was? But it was short-lasted because the man was coming. They're trying to sell Simeon everything at the same time as they're washing their feet, washing their hands. The same time they're trying to be as presentable as they can be. And the servant took their donkeys and gave them feed. Very gracious. In a time of famine. Have you thought about that? In a time of famine, they're feeding someone else's animals, and these men are fixing to sit down to a lavish feast. Probably haven't eaten this well in weeks, maybe months, maybe even in a couple of years. They're going to sit down to a feast. Talk about a Thanksgiving. Genesis 43:25 through 28. Then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they had heard that they would eat bread there. They're rehearsing. They're getting it all ready. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and they bowed down before him to the earth. And they bowed again and again. This is the perfect fulfillment of Joseph's first dream. In his first dream, all 11 brothers bowed down to him. They have, in their first journey to Egypt, 10 of his brothers bowed. Now this time, 11 have. Now his first dream has been fulfilled. In verse 27, then he asked them about their well-being and said, is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive? Remember, it's been weeks, even months since he saw them. For a man of Jacob's age, and with the stress of the famine, he very well may be dead. Verse 28, but they answered, Your servant, our father, is in good health, and he is still alive. And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. That means they went down to the ground and they touched their foreheads to the ground. The old Hebrew here, the way that this is phrased, they did it 3 times. They bowed, come back on their knees, and then bowed again, and then bowed again. This is the fulfillment of the second dream. The second dream said the father would bow as well. They have invoked the father's name by calling him, and he's your servant, and in his name they're bowing. So the second dream is fulfilled. Genesis 43, 33. No, yes, I just finished 28. Well, what happened to 29? There it is. I turned the page over wrong. Sorry about that. Verse 29. Then he lifted up his eyes, and he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. And he said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Did you notice he didn't give him an opportunity to say anything? He immediately went to addressing Benjamin. Don't you imagine? He wanted to touch Benjamin. He wanted to go up and lay his hand on his shoulder, or he wanted to take him in an embrace. Why didn't he yet? Because the testing wasn't over yet. He had a lot more to learn about these brothers. Now Joseph, in verse 30, now his heart, that's Joseph's heart, yearned for his brother. So Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and he wept there. Is this your brother? May God be gracious to you. And then he has gotten so full of emotion. I can see him just looking at his servant and he took off. Remember, he's talking through an interpreter. He is not talking Hebrew to them. He is talking Egyptian to them. They do not know that he understands Hebrew. Okay? He has just found out something wonderful. He's found out that his daddy's alive. That's got hope within his heart that he will be able to see his father yet once more time before daddy dies. He has now got to see the brother, his full brother, his only innocent brother, for the first time in many years. Let's see. Maybe 22, 23 years since he saw, maybe even longer. I know I've been saying all along that everything I've read has got Benjamin of being somewhere around the age of between 22 and 25. I'm inclined to think with further reading that Joseph, instead of being 2 years, Benjamin being 2 years old when Joseph left, Benjamin may have been a little bit older, maybe as old as 6 when his brother left. So that would put, Joseph is now 39 or so, and that would put Benjamin somewhere around 28, 29 years old. But he wanted to acknowledge his brother. And it was just more than his heart could take. So he had to go back away from these people and compose himself. Joseph has spent years hiding his emotion, learning how to be a slave, learning how to be a prisoner where he didn't have the freedom to express himself like he may have wanted to. He's had years of training on how to hide his emotions. And for him to break down here shows the depth of longing he has had to see his family, to touch his family, to love his family. Verse 31, 32, Joseph washed his face and he came out and he restrained himself. And he said to the servants, serve the bread. When it says he restrained himself, it means he took a deep breath and got himself under control. The things he wanted to do, he refrained from doing. He refrained from telling them who he was. He refrained from hugging their necks and having that physical contact that he so desired to have. Looked at his servants and he said, the feast needs to begin. Start the entrees. Put the bread out. Bring the meat. Bring the vegetables. Get it started. So they set him a place, the servants, set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves. 3 tables of folks. Because the Egyptians would not eat with the Hebrews, for that was an abomination to the Egyptians. Well, picture this now. We've talked about this before. The Egyptian men did not want any hair on their body. They thought it was unsanitary. They thought it was gross. Okay? So they shaved their heads. And if they had any hair on their face at all, it would have been a little small goatee, and it would have been lacquered so that it didn't shed. Okay? The rest of their body, anything that showed, had to be shaved. That made them clean. That was in their thought processes, in their culture. That's what they did. Now picture these Hebrew shepherds. Okay? They let their beards grow. They didn't groom their beards. They were a tangled mess. You can imagine what all was in that beard. Everything they beat forever. Their hair was shoulder length. Okay? They probably stank to high heavens, to be honest with you. So they didn't want to eat with those Hebrews. They felt like they were dirty, nasty, unkempt, and they didn't want to. It was an abomination for more than one reason, but we're not going to go into the other reason why. They knew the Hebrews were shepherds, and they didn't like shepherds, and there's a good reason why they didn't. So they wanted a table for them, a table for these Hebrews, and then Joseph was the second in command. His hierarchy, his place, his position. They wouldn't sit with him because of his high position. Joseph could have demanded that they sit with him, but he knew they practiced different cultural rites than he practiced at meal times. So he didn't force that. He had a table all of his own. The brothers would have had a table provided for them, and then the Egyptian servants and the Egyptian stewards, they sat at a different table. Ooh, interesting. Verse 33. And they set before him the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. You know what this means? Joseph is sitting in his chair, and one of the servants, or maybe even his steward, and they were speaking Egyptian. Joseph directed where each person, each one of the brothers, where he was supposed to sit. The steward went up to Reuben, and Joseph and pointed to the chair he wanted him to sit in. Then he would bring, maybe he went to Judah, and maybe he started to go to the second chair, and Joseph and pointed to the fourth chair to put Judah in. You see where I'm going? Each one of them, there was 11 chairs or 11 positions, and he put them from Reuben to Benjamin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Do you know what the odds are? I didn't do these odds now. I've been told. You know what the odds are that for someone who does not know to take 11 brothers and to seat them in correct chronological sequence? Remember, between most of these brothers, there was just a 6-year difference. It wasn't like there was a decade between each brother. Between all of them but Benjamin, there was only like 6 years difference. And Joseph, because he knew him, he knew his brothers, but they didn't know he was Joseph. He placed them in correct order, and it astounded them. When they realized what he had done, it blew their minds. He must really have some special powers if he's able to do this. We didn't tell him. He doesn't know us. And yet he placed us in birth order. This by itself would have amazed them. And the more amazed they got, there was a little bit of terror mixed in that. A little bit of terror mixed in that. They were astonished. Then verse 34. Then he took servings to them from before him. So the food product the table was laden in front of Joseph. But Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. Okay. When they began to dish up the food and take the food to the brothers, they were all thrilled to death. Like I said, this was a feast. They hadn't had that for a while. He took them food product, every one of them. But when it come to Benjamin's place, well, it looked like he was having a banquet all by himself. There would have been bowls of food or mounds of food all around him. Joseph was listening. Remember, he knows their language. They don't know that he knows. So they have the freedom to speak without him knowing, they think, what they're saying. They didn't do anything negative about Benjamin receiving more than they. They just seemed to be happy with what they had. They didn't begrudge him. They didn't make fun of him. They didn't do anything to deride Benjamin for getting more. It wasn't Benjamin's fault he got more. And they accepted it. The way that they treated Joseph when he was a young man was so vastly different from the way they were treating Benjamin. Had they grown that much? Had they learned that much? They were passing this part of the test. There was only one more test to do, and it was the biggest. It was the hardest. But as of right now, Joseph is thrilled with them passing this part of the test. So it says he drank, so they drank and were merry with him. Actually, in the Hebrew, they got stinking drunk, okay? And they had a blast. They had a really good time. Like I said, they were thrilled. They could see themselves going home with Benjamin. Their brother Simeon had been returned to them. The man wasn't mad at them. He was providing food product for them. He has given them a feast. They hadn't ate this well. They hadn't had this much wine, this much food in a long time, and they had a hearty party. Okay. Remember, we still know Joseph as the man. They still know him as the man. They still know him as someone who cannot understand him. But they passed his test. Only one more to go. I just really am looking forward to chapter 44. I hope you are too, because something really, really beautiful happens in 44. I'll see you later. Have a good day. May God bless.